Tisha, let's start recording this webinar so we can watch it later. Thanks everybody for joining the IEC for our Lunch and Learn series. We put together these sessions because we hope it'll keep our community connected during this difficult time. And we made them available to the public. Just really excited by all of the variety of people joining who are members and friends and people who have never heard of us before but are excited about these topics. If you're not a member of IEC and you're able to give, please consider joining today at islandbiro.org/donate. For your technical information, all attendees are muted by default. And if you joined via Zoom, please use the chat function to ask questions, add comments, or provide resources. Time permitting, we're going to take live questions at the end of the session. And if you are using the video option, please be mindful of what's around you because we will be able to see it. We're eventually going to get to that question portion, and I'm going to introduce Delmar. But for those of you who want to ask questions, you can put it in the chat if you're using the Zoom webinar, or you can raise your hand. But for those of you joining phone via the phone, you'll hit *9 to raise your hand, and then we can unmute you. But I'll give a little more information later on that. But Delmar has said he is fine if folks add some questions into the chat as you come up with them, but we just may not ask them for a little bit. But I'm really excited about today's webinar because we're going to be talking about clean energy workforce development. I think that as we are going through this crisis, the economic implications are just mind-blowing of what we might be looking at in the time going ahead. And so giving folks access to the workforce, training them is going to be more important than ever. So this is an incredibly timely topic, and I'm really excited for all of those of you who have decided to join today to learn a little bit more about it. And we have a very talented presenter today, Delmar Gillus, who is at Elevate Energy, and Delmar is also the treasurer of the Illinois Environmental Council Board of Directors. So thank you so much, Delmar, for taking the time. He is just such an expert in these issues and cares about them so deeply, and is he's been a constant source of advice for us on the policy and the program for this and how we do things. So with that, I'm going to pitch it off to Delmar to do the webinar. And you said if you have a question, type it in the chat box. If you are just on the phone, we'll give you some options later when we take questions at the end. And Delmar is using a slideshow that you should be able to see now, but we will do our best to talk about it in a way that those of you on the phone can get a good picture of what's going on. So take it away, Delmar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen, and good afternoon, everyone. As Jen mentioned, I am extremely excited to be able to present this webinar today. And I've put up a walkthrough agenda that I'd like to kind of use to kind of guide the discussion. As Jen mentioned, I'm also very eager to see and hear your questions. So if you do have some things you'd like to add to the conversation, please feel free to hit us up on the chat, and we'll take some pauses along the way to work in some questions. But just at a high level, what I'd like to do is just do a real quick welcome and introduction. Talk about some key topics like why do we even need to be having this conversation about a clean energy workforce? Talk about some of the challenges. I'm sure all of you have probably heard things like workforce development doesn't work, or, you know, that's a lot of money to spend on training, et cetera. And part of us being able to move forward is to understand what those challenges and issues are and being able to address those. I also wanted to share some lessons from the field. These are things that folks that are out as practitioners and community members are talking about as it relates to workforce programs. Going through some making it happen, there are actually some really good examples out there of programs that are having some success and some case studies, and then doing some question and answer at the end. So with that, I'm going to do just a small handful of the requisite kind of who am I and who is Elevate Energy for those who may not be as familiar. But my name's Delmar Gillus. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Elevate Energy. So one of the things that I am really excited about is as COO, a large part of my job and role is working on operations. And for all of the operational folks out there, know COVID-19 has been the operational challenge of the last month or so. So it brings me great relief to have an hour where I can talk about some of the work that we do in communities. And in addition to my COO functions, one of the things that I'm very passionate about and support is our workforce development programs. So from an Elevate perspective, Elevate is really interested in bringing smarter energy use for all communities. So a lot of our work centers around making sure everyone has access to clean air, clean water, and clean energy, as well as the programs that are out there to support those. Because oftentimes underserved communities may not always be aware or have access to these resources. Elevate's primary role is making sure that that access is available. So that's kind of who we are and kind of where we focus a lot of our attention. One of our key goals at Elevate is that we want to transform the energy system. So what that transformation means is that we want to increase the number of jobs held by people of color and women in Illinois' clean energy economy. We focused a lot of energy also on returning citizens or folks that have past records. And we also focus on foster care alumni, which have a significantly higher unemployment rate than the general populace. In addition to underserved communities, most folks tend to think about underserved communities as just communities in urban environments, but there's also a lot of underserved communities across the state. And one of the areas that we're focused on as well is Southern Illinois, especially in coal country, where there's a lot of folks that are getting transitioned away from their current roles in the fossil fuel industry. So the question becomes, what can we do to assist folks that have been displaced by the closing of fossil fuel plants and get them engaged in the clean energy economy as well? So that's kind of really a summary of Elevate and who we are. One of the key things, though, that I do want to just touch on is when you think about workforce development, especially in the context of the way Elevate looks at it, it's not just about us. Workforce development is strongest when there's community engagement and partnerships being built. So on this slide, I have just a list of some of the partners. There's a lot of conversation when we talk about CEJA about engaging community colleges. And you can see here we have the logo of City College of Chicago. They've been an excellent partner providing resources, classrooms, computer access. They're even helping us think through how do we do remote training and remote workforce development during the COVID crisis. And we have a lot of really strong community-based organizations that are listed here that are partners. And so I can't talk about this subject without touching on them. I'll also be adding some additional partners as we kind of go through the presentation, especially some of our partners in Southern Illinois, which are on some of the preceding slides or subsequent slides. So one of the key questions that I always like to ask is, why do we need the clean energy workforce development programs in the first place? Is there a reason why we're focusing so much time and energy on these programs? And what's the genesis of that request and that need? So I'm really going to talk about it from two perspectives. One perspective is the opportunity perspective, and the second perspective is from the challenge. And I think a lot of this information is things that folks are probably fairly familiar with, but I just want to kind of amplify it because it does give some real context as to why we're working so hard to drive solid workforce programs. And one of the words that you'll hear me use a lot when I talk about workforce is going to be equity and access, or two words, I guess. Equity and access are critical to any sort of workforce development program that's being developed. But let's look at the opportunity first. So just at a high level, I think we're all aware that the energy system is in transition. There is a lot going on now as we're looking to address the pending climate crisis. And part of what we're doing and seeing is that you're seeing a lot of jobs and opportunities are gradually shifting over from fossil fuel-based jobs to jobs that are in the clean energy economy. A lot of my presentation today focuses on the solar industry, which is a large part of the Future Energy Jobs Act. But it's important to remember that the transition also is very relevant to the energy efficiency marketplace, and many of the numbers that I'm showing you are very similar in that sector as well. So it's important to not just always think about renewables because that's kind of the new cool and sexy thing, but energy efficiency is also a core component of any good clean energy policy and clean energy job creation. So as you can see from this slide, clean energy jobs have been increasing across the US, and specific to the Midwest, they're growing at 5 times the rate of other industries. So when people are asking, well, why are you focusing so much energy on creating clean energy jobs? Across the country, and especially in the Midwest, that's where the job growth is occurring. And even without a lot of the incentives that are out there, job growth would be pretty aggressive. One of the things that has happened across the Midwest, however, is that programs like FIJA have really stimulated the job growth. And you can see even in the early years of FIJA, we added basically 1,300 jobs. Here's just some other numbers that I just wanted to share via an infographic. As you can see, Illinois has a lot to be proud of as it relates to solar job growth. A lot of this job growth was stimulated through the Future Energy Jobs Act, or FIJA, but you can also see that there's a lot of work to be done. And there's a lot of opportunity also in Illinois. So the context of these first two slides is there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of job growth, and there's ample work out there for folks that are interested in either transitioning from fossil fuel jobs, or if folks are looking to start a career in solar energy. And once again, if you take these numbers and add them to the energy efficiency field, you really start to get a good feel for the amount of job opportunities in the clean energy economy. So now let's start to look at some of the challenges. When you look at the workforces, you start to notice that if we look at the energy efficiency workforce, for instance, roughly, I'd say 25% of the jobs are held by women, 15% by Latino Hispanic, 8% by African American, and 11% by veterans. One of the things that we also look at is when you really unpack these numbers, when you start looking at returning citizens, when you start looking at foster care alumni, when you start to look in our urban centers and look at the unemployment rates, what you start to see is that the folks working on the jobs in the communities often don't look like the people in the community. So you have situations where the work crews and the work being done in many communities does not resemble the communities themselves. And whether that's energy efficiency, solar workforce, or other categories, there's some severe challenges with ensuring underserved communities have access to these jobs. The next slide that I've pulled up starts to look at the utility supplier diversity spend. Now, one of the things that has been happening over the last few years is that all of the utilities have been putting effort into diversifying their programs and moving forward their supplier diversity spend, but we still have a lot of work to do. And many of the utilities have worked with a lot of community organizations on partnerships to kind of start to move these numbers. But from that, we also see that there are opportunities that are still out there, and that there's a lot of work to be done with partnering an underserved workforce, an underserved supplier base, and the utility programs and the utility spend that's out there. Because I could be mistaken, but I believe these numbers also include the women-run businesses. And when you peel out the white women-owned businesses, these numbers drop precipitously. I mean, literally can drop down into single digits in many categories. And so there really needs to be a focus on connecting jobs, opportunities in the clean energy economy. And that's the primary reason why we need to focus a lot of energy on workforce programs and workforce development. So what are some of the challenges that we face when we talk about workforce programs? From the standpoint of a workforce program, what exactly does that mean first and foremost? And I want to start off with some real simple definitions that kind of twisted me up a little bit when I started working in this space. One of the things that I often confused was kind of the workforce development versus contractor development. The workforce development programs tend to focus on developing and training the workforce. So these are the folks that are out in the field installing the solar panels, doing the maintenance, they're energy analysts, they're doing energy modeling. They're the folks that are actually out there doing the work. The contractor development is the area where you're developing contractors. So these would be organizations like Millennium Solar Electric, who in this picture is Chris Williams, the president of Millennium Solar Electric, and the trainees that he helped train on one of the projects in the community. So when we talk about workforce programs, it's important to kind of distinguish between a workforce development program that focuses on the labor force and a contractor development program which develops the contractors. But one of the things that we often are confronted with is, why do these programs have challenges, and what are these challenges? So when you hear people saying, well, gee, workforce development just doesn't work, or it's not a good use of our money, or, you know, the programs don't meet the needs, they're not creating jobs, etc. Oftentimes what is happening is that the program has some very specific challenges that are limiting its ability to be successful. And I've created just a short list, and I say short because there's several other items of reasons why these programs often are not successful. And what I found is that when people develop programs that address these challenges, then the programs are successful and they are meeting the targets and the expectations. So I'm just going to kind of click through a few of these and just touch on them. Many of these are self-explanatory, but they're things that if we don't address them in our policy and our legislation and our partnerships, we often will create programs that do not meet community needs and do not meet the expectations of the trainees and the companies that hire them. So just really quickly, one of the biggest ones that I see is that the programs do not have community engagement. Oftentimes when a funder hires a training or workforce development organization that does not have connections in the community, a program gets set up. The program is not customized to the students. It's not engaged the community leadership. And what tends to happen is that the community isn't actually supporting and engaged in selecting the students, providing the necessary support that the students need to matriculate through the program, and the community isn't there to help the students secure jobs and opportunities in the communities. If you were to take a look right now, and I don't have the visual of ComEd, if you go and look at where their incentive dollars are spent, and overlap that or overlay that with where the contractors have headquarters, there's a very clear correlation between where the contractors are located and where the incentive dollars and the projects are being done. So if the community is not engaged, is not part of the discussion, it is very difficult to have contractors in those communities, to have projects in those communities, and have trainees from those communities be successful. So one of the biggest things that any program can have is not just having a community organization that's in charge of putting out flyers, but to have that community organization engaged in all aspects of the program so that the program is a community program and not just a training course that is held in the community hall in a particular neighborhood. The next one that I wanted to touch on, which is really important, is the training only, no support or wraparound services. Especially when you're working with underserved communities, it's not just about getting an instructor, some class books, and having an end of class test. All quality workforce development programs, especially in underserved communities, have wraparound services. So what are those? There are things like having stipends for transportation, general stipends. Oftentimes, there's an opportunity cost when you're working in an underserved community where folks can't go to work because they're in all-day training. And for programs like these that are teaching people career skills, that's a significant contribution of their time. So having a stipend is something important. Childcare is an issue for many students that they're not able to participate because of childcare needs. Having the correct tools and outfits to wear. You'll notice in a lot of the pictures that you see, everybody has on matching hard hats, matching t-shirts, etc., because we want folks to have the clothes and outfits that are required to do the work. Things like career building skills, and working on resumes and having a job fair are things that are important wraparound services. If you just train somebody from an environmental justice underserved community and just say, here's your training, good luck, and there's no connection with jobs or employers or career skills, then it is very difficult for them to get access to these jobs and opportunities. So I could do a whole presentation alone just on wraparound services and how to set them up, but suffice to say that if ever you see a training program in an underserved community and you ask the question what support or wraparound services are provided, and they're very few if none, then that program is going to have a lot of challenges, especially with getting the results that are expected. The next one is underfunded or misfunded programs, which ties in nicely with the bullet that I have next, which is kind of a decentralized, disjointed design and delivery. A really good example of this would be if you have program dollars, if you decentralize everything and give every organization a very small amount, it is extremely difficult to put together a program that is comprehensive enough to do the deep dive training, have the wraparound services, and support the job alignment. So having some sort of centralized, here's the curriculum, here are the services that we want to provide, and this is the metrics that will ensure success, is important. Now, these programs can be hosted in different communities so that everybody can have access, but there should be some centralization around success metrics and how the programs are delivered, so all of the students are receiving quality education. The next one that I want to touch on is around the constraints and barriers limitate participation. Part of the reason that the wraparound services are put in place are to address barriers. And oftentimes, programs miss out on the exciting, high potential candidates in communities because they don't address barriers. And whether those barriers have to do with childcare, transportation, access to tools, etc. When programs start to address barriers, then you start to see the participation rates go way up, and then you start to see the success rate of the programs go up. So the last two that I just want to touch on are the communication and outreach, and then also talk about metrics and evaluation. So from the standpoint of communication and outreach, one of the things that we've seen as a major inhibitor to successful workforce development programs is being able to reach the students that would benefit the most from the programs. And this ties in and touches with the engaging the community component, but it also ties in with the underfunded and misfunded programs. One of the things that's often left out of budgets and planning programs as it relates to workforce development is making sure that we fund the outreach and the community-based communication so that we're bringing people into these programs that are the best participants. And what we've seen is that when we form community-based partnerships, when we do good outreach, good communication. So that can be everything from communicating with the alderman's office to your county commissioner to the local co-op if you're in a rural area. But if people don't know about the program and don't know about the jobs that are created from the program, then what you end up with is less than optimal class participation and less than optimal students in the class. And so making sure we fund and support the communication, the outreach, and the engagement is a critical component. The last thing that I'll touch on, and then I'll kind of open it up to see if there's any questions or comments, is just around the metrics and the evaluation. One of the key things that we've seen is that oftentimes you can see how well a program is set up and designed just by looking at what are the metrics that have been defined for the program and how those metrics are being evaluated. And so I won't do a deep dive into community-based evaluations, but suffice to say, challenges that programs have is when the program gets established, having alignment with all of the community partners around what does success look like and how are we going to manage that success. It also helps with a very important variable. As you saw from my early slide, we had about 8 community partners. And if you don't have clear alignment on what your goals are and how those goals are measured, you have a severe risk of scope creep and getting off track. And so one of the things that we really try to focus on is what are we trying to accomplish? What does success look like? And how are we measuring that success? So I'm going to pull up here and see if there's any questions or comments about anything that I've kind of covered up to this point. And if folks agree, disagree, have some anecdotes on their experiences, we're more than happy to, I would love to hear your thoughts and have you share those with us. So Tanisha, any comments or questions? I think you're muted.
Yeah, so as of right now, there aren't any comments or questions in the chat. Oh, wait, no, here's one. So, oh, they're flooding in now. Awesome. So first question, have any target communities done this successfully yet?
I would say definitely yes. Part of the Future Energy Jobs Act legislation was to seed these types of programs. And actually, one of the things that I would like to kind of stop and pause here on once I answer questions is to show a really short video clip of a community in Marion, Illinois that did successfully implement a job training program. So one of the things I'm especially excited about is that the model that I just talked through works for both rural environments, they work in urban environments, and they can work in a community college environment. The approach that we're recommending is an approach with engagement, barrier reduction, strong training and development, and the establishment of good metrics and evaluation. And if you kind of wrap your program in those principles, there's a high probability that you'll have success. And there's several good examples of that across the state, which I'm happy to share.
All right, and again, there's a video to come. Very excited. Next question, how does Elevate participate in workforce development? That is, what are your actions and programs?
I would say one of the highlights of our portfolio is working on the Future Energy Jobs Act. And our role on that program was we were selected as one of the solar pipeline solar workforce training organizations. And basically what we did was we partnered with multiple community organizations, some here in Chicago and some in Southern Illinois, to craft a solar training program. And to date, I believe we've trained roughly 100 students and contractors in the solar space. And we have several additional cohorts of both contractors as well as students that we continue to train through the middle of next year. And I actually have some examples of that that I'll show in the video that I'll play shortly.
All right. With COVID-19's impact on CEJA, do you foresee a gap in your funding or ability to move forward in your plans?
I think that's a really good question. I would say the thing that we are focused on right now is really trying to look at the programs that we have and figure out how we can transition those programs to online and remote formats. A good example is we're right in the middle, literally, of one of our solar training cohorts that we were hosting in a partnership with City College. And when the COVID-19 pandemic started, we started to work with City College and some of our partners to transition the program to a remote online solution. With that, in underserved communities, you do have to make sure that you provide people access to computers and internet access. And so we've been working with our students on that. At a very high level, between City College and Elevate, we're able to either donate or provide laptops to folks that don't have them. And from an internet access perspective, I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but for folks with smartphones, the phone companies have activated your tethering. So you're actually able to use your smartphone as a Wi-Fi device for no charge during the COVID crisis, which is a good feature. And then ComEd also provides, or not ComEd, I'm sorry, Comcast. Sorry, ComEd, sorry, Comcast. Comcast also provides low-cost internet for underserved communities as well. And so between these tools, we're able to work with folks to get access to the training and provide what we can online.
Okay, so we have 2 more questions. I'll ask them and then you can get to your video and then we will reopen the discussion and question portion. So how can communities apply for such workforce development programs?
Excellent question. The Illinois, there's a couple of places that you can apply, and I may have to follow up with Tanisha on putting the information in the post-event follow-up. But if you go to the Illinois Clean Jobs Council website, literally on the home page, there's a big button and a logo that says, "Are you interested in clean jobs training?" And there's a link to get to it there. So I can look that up while the video is playing and give you the exact email address or web address for that. Also, if you go to www.elevateenergy.com and look up job training, there's also a link to the job training programs that Elevate runs on our website. So those would be 2 locations that I would start with if you're interested in learning more about the job training programs.
Yeah, and we can be sure to get that out to participants. All right, last question for the video. Why wasn't there enough money budgeted for FEJA? This is an argument FEJA opponents can use against us by saying there was fiscal irresponsibility in the beginning, notwithstanding some of its success.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and you hear that question quite a bit. What I tend to do is focus on what FEJA provided and focus on what we need to do moving forward. And being in Springfield during those discussions, what I can say is that what FEJA did do is it allowed us, especially on the workforce side, to understand what types of programs work and what types of solutions need additional support. From some of the areas that I identified on the challenges, I think that there were things like the outreach and communication was a good example of something that I think we should have and could have invested more dollars in. I think there was also too big a gap between the time that FEJA was started and the programs hit the streets. And during that gap, folks began to ask a lot of tough questions about why aren't we seeing the dollars, why aren't people getting trained, et cetera. I also think that from a volumetric perspective, there weren't enough dollars to train as many people as were needed per the question. I think the biggest resolution of that, honestly, is the Clean Energy Jobs Act legislation, where we're going from $10 million for certain programs over 4 years, like the solar pipeline dollars were $10 million over roughly 4 years. The CEJA legislation is looking at $25+ million for workforce development and another $20 million for contractor development in a year. So you're going from basically piloting and testing programs and getting a few people trained to having enough volume to meet the demands and the needs that are out there for the clean energy economy. So it's definitely a good question and definitely a good critique. But the thing that I'm optimistic about is that folks are looking at what's working in FEJA, looking at where the challenges are, and we're designing new, improved, better funded programs through the CEJA legislation that are going to meet some of those needs. But all great questions.
Yeah. So we are going to transition to the video, which sounds like will provide more context and possibly answer more questions. And then we'll reopen the Q&A. And yeah, For people on the phone, you can raise their hand by dialing *9. All right.
So I just want to make sure, can you hear the video, Tanisha?
What happened
Yeah.
today was really a celebration of a collaboration between many partners that culminated in the installation of solar panels on one of our homeowners' house. These partners, AES Solar, Elevate Energy, Grid Alternatives, LSSI of Southern Illinois, all came together to provide this at a no cost to our homeowner that will reduce her energy consumption dramatically.
We're the nation's largest solar installer, and we serve underserved communities and low-income housing so that they can have access to this coming green energy economy. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been training 10 trainees through the Lutheran Social Services of Southern Illinois. And we've been doing this in partnership with Elevate Energy as part of the Future Energy Jobs Act. And so we've got 10 trainees that identify as part of the reentry community, and they're gearing up to get solar skills and get hands-on experience so that they can hopefully get a job in this coming solar industry in Southern Illinois.
I've learned how to install solar panels. We learned computer skills, and the people there are marvelous. So it's really good work.
June 4th was 19 years doing solar here in Southern Illinois. I'm very excited to finally see solar going mainstream. To see more local professional solar installers pop up, it fills my heart with joy.
So not only are we saving energy for the homeowner, but we're also training some people on how to install the solar panels and learning about that process. So, you know, in Southern Illinois, coal is really big, but there's other things too, is solar. And of course, we don't have wind down here as far as those types of things to create power for us. But this is another viable source of energy is solar. So proud to be a part of this today. And thank you for all the people that have participated, volunteered, those of you that are having the opportunity to come and learn.
Last week, we started getting them certified in OSHA 10 safety, also giving them a background as to all the different types of energy sources, because a lot of folks come from having a background working in the coal industry. And so how does that identity from being an energy worker, how can we expand that to be evolving to include the coming clean energy technologies? And so we had a lot of good conversation about that. And then we started practicing some of the hands-on skills like conduit bending, doing roof layouts. And now we finally came out on this roof out here with Habitat for Humanity so we can put those skills into action and install an actual solar system for Lisa Shepard, who's a client with Habitat for Humanity.
And when I heard solar panels, that was it. And then I wasn't really sure, I couldn't remember everything he said after that. So I had to call him the next day because I thought he told me that they were going to install solar panels and they were going to teach me how to do it. And I thought, well, that worked, you know, sweat equity for building a house, that's pretty good, but I don't know about getting up on a ladder.
So when she called me back a day or so later to get clarification, we worked through that. She was much relieved that she wasn't going to be the one installing the solar.
My role is I'm in training with Grid Alternatives to learn how to do solar panel installation and to learn how to, the electric work, and hopefully it'll lead to more. Yeah, I'm gonna pursue a career in this field.
It enhances the community and enhances your neighborhood, and it brings up the property value, and it gives the person a fresh start and a good sense of well-being about themselves, having been accomplished or something.
All right.
Okay, so we'll hop back into questions unless you have something to close out with, or?
Yes, let's answer another question and then I can jump back into the presentation.
So have there been challenges with messaging on this in places like Marion or Williamson and Saline counties? This is from our very own Elliot. He said he lived down there for a bit and folks seemed somewhat hostile to clean energy because of closing coal mines. I think it's misdirected anger, but culture is something hard to address.
I think that's a great question. I would say from the programs that we have hosted, it's actually been somewhat the opposite, but I'm also not naive enough to think that there isn't pushback and concern. I think what we have been trying to do is to position this as we are coming in the communities to help with folks that have been displaced. We are not in the community to displace people from the work that they're doing. And yes, there can be definitely some skepticism, especially in communities where there still are coal jobs. And folks are looking at this as something that may be trying to come in and displace them. Once again, I think the model that we talked about is critical. It has to be in partnership with community leaders and groups in the community that people trust. You know, if you have me driving down in a pickup truck from Chicago telling folks that this is the best thing for them, it's not going to be as successful as someone from the local Lions Club, from the local Habitat, from local businesses saying, hey, we're going to be installing solar panels in our community. We'd love to have you be a part of that, rather than flying in folks from North Carolina or Missouri or California to do the work. And so we've really treated it as an opportunity to form community partnerships. So that's where, as we fund and look at these programs, it is critical that we invest the money in the upfront parts, which are the community outreach and the communication, because if we don't invest in those pieces and just show up with a training course, you do run the risk of having a potential response that isn't what you want. But I would say in general, folks have been very welcoming and supportive of the programs. And ultimately, I think people are excited about learning something new and having access to new jobs and new technology. So it's been a very positive experience, but we do have to be mindful when we do these programs that they have to be community centric or they're going to receive pushback. Cool. So I have a few more slides that I would like to go through. So I'll kind of push pause on other questions, but if you do have them, please feel free to send them to Tanisha. I also want to thank everybody for your patience. This is my first time using Zoom. So in addition to doing the presentation, I'm also trying to make sure I'm hitting and clicking on the right buttons. So I appreciate everybody's patience with that. So let's see, there we go. All right. So I've kind of really talked on this, so I'm just going to touch on this really briefly. You can't really talk about the challenges without talking about what works. And the thing that our approach is really focused on is not trying to be the workforce know-it-alls in the scenario. What we've done a lot of, honestly, is listening. And even though we may think something is the best way to do it, if we try it out and the students come back and say, hey, this is a better way to do this, or the community organization that we're partnering with says, here's the best way to do this, we want to align with what works for the students and what works for the community. And in that light, we also want to work with and train and develop instructors from the community that understand the community, that understand the students. In many of our programs, we have had people that helped participate in the class, help teach it the next time we offered it in their community. Because we really want to reinforce that community connection. And guess what happens? Then they start saying, hey, I know this guy that's been doing construction for 5 years, it's really interested, let's try to get him signed up. And before you know it, it starts to become almost like a perpetual motion machine, where you have a good program, you help people get jobs, the folks in the program are referring more folks, and then they start getting jobs and opportunities, and it starts to create an engine in the community. The other thing that we are trying to do is, this isn't about Elevate, and it's not about us having a footprint in the community. Anytime we can find or create a partnership or develop a community partner that can run these programs for us and support it, we want to try to do that. So one of the things that we've done is we've worked with organizations like Sustainable Options for Urban Living, Millennium Solar Electric Training Company, and what they are community-based organizations that do energy efficiency and solar training. So because we are leveraging those organizations and they're in the community, they also have skin in the game and a vested interest in the training going well. But more importantly, they know the students, they know the community, they know the projects that are in the community. And so what we're doing in addition to training people is we're doing economic development in the communities where the training is taking place. And that's also one of the core tenets of the Clean Energy Jobs Act, is to have workforce hubs in communities that need them, that are run by community partners. And if there aren't community partners in those communities that can run them, then yes, we can come in and work with a community organization to build that capacity. But ultimately, we want these programs in the communities, run by the communities, and supported by the communities. So I did talk on a lot of these things already. So the personalized coaching and mentoring, it comes down to just meeting people where they are. Solar jobs require quite a bit of math skills. And one of the things that you hear all the time is, can the students learn the math, et cetera, et cetera. Or I'm here to say, yes, they can, and they do it well. Many of them do these solar calculations better than I do. And part of that is because of the coaching and mentoring. We talked about the case management and wraparound services, and I touched on some of the key areas that I mentioned before. I also talked about the recruiting and onboarding is critical. Our programs, you heard in the video, we focus on training, certifications, and ongoing support. We're not just teaching people something and throwing them up on the roof. They're getting certified, they're getting ongoing support, we're helping them with job readiness skills, and we're staying with them once they get an opportunity to help make sure they stay retained on the jobs. Okay, so I have a few slides here, and I'm just going to click through them pretty quickly because we're running close to time. But the moral of the story when you look at this is you see that this isn't just about one organization. It's about partnerships, it's about alignment, it's about figuring out what works best. We did not come into this knowing everything there was to know about community-based workforce development, but I do know this, our team does know how to do community-based workforce development. And many of the partners on here are experts in that field, and we're happy to work with them on FIJA and other programs. And so forming partnerships is important. Who do you target? The assumption that often gets made is that underserved communities are not the best place to find students. And I just want to dispel that. I can give, the best example I can give is our second training cohort had 31 students on day one. On the final day of class, we had 30 students. The one person that couldn't finish the program had a sick family member that they had to leave the program to take care of. The students that we work with, many of which are returning citizens, foster care alumni, have had trouble in the past with maintaining steady employment, were some of the best, most committed, sharpest students that we've ever worked with. So for folks that say that these programs don't work and that folks can't attain the skills, it's just not true. we have class over class after class of examples of students that, when supported properly, trained properly, when coordinated with the right employers, are doing exceedingly well. And we want to take that mindset and that model and replicate it across the state in the form of more community workforce hubs and in the form of giving more people more opportunities. And in fact, because these communities are often underserved, you find those untapped gems that will be the site leader, the roof supervisors, et cetera, often are coming from programs like this, because now they have an excellent career opportunity, and they understand the importance of all the hard work and dedication and commitment, and they are very committed employees. So I just want to make sure folks know and understand that some of the best solar installers that we're seeing are coming from underserved communities. Okay, so I'm going to kind of keep it moving here and just touch on some of the examples that we have really quickly, because I know we're almost out of time. But just in summary, one of the key things to do is to design a successful program. If you haven't heard me say it 1,000 times, focus on removing barriers, make sure there's good communications, make sure it's community-based. And as I said before, please leverage the learnings and successes that we've seen in FEJA and take that knowledge, collaborate, and pass CEJA, because CEJA is going to be able to provide a lot of the things that we're talking about today. And here is, for those of you who haven't seen me before, I'm the guy with the blue coat on, but part of what we want to do is listen, lead, and share. And that's been the focus that we've taken as we've worked to design and implement CEJA. And hopefully, using a lot of the lessons that we've learned through FEJA, we're going to be able to put together a nationally recognized workforce development program that sees the results that we're looking for. So with that, I'm going to pull up, I have just a few slides with a couple of case studies. One of the projects that I'm really excited about was the work that we did in Bronzeville around building a solar flower, which is a community-based solar program. And I'm going to put a link in my follow-up for folks to go out and watch the video of that, where we took one of our solar classes here in Chicago and basically worked on or supported the solar flower implementation in Bronzeville. And projects like that can be done all across the city. They look nice, they train people, they provide opportunities, and they're just a good foundational solar opportunity for folks in the city. So Tanisha, with that, I know we're kind of running short on time, but I want to thank everyone for their time and questions. And I don't know if we have time for a question or two before we have to wrap.
Maybe you can answer this one question quickly. Are there any volunteer or paid opportunities available with Elevate?
I would say yes, but I would say that there's more than just Elevate. All of the partners that I listed, and I'm happy to include them in the partner, in the meeting follow-up, are looking for both volunteers and many are hiring. So the quick answer to that is yes. I would say go to our website, and also feel free to reach out to me at the information here on the slide, and I'm happy to connect anybody with either job opportunities or program opportunities.
All right, so thank you, Delmar, for joining us with this. We are going to close up. We have to thank everyone for joining IEC's Lunch and Learn series. We hope these sessions are just helping people connect with their community during a difficult time, and they are publicly available. So in your follow-up, you'll receive a link to not only this video, but the ones we've had thus far and the schedule going forward. We'll also get you guys the resources like the slides and YouTube video, and then you can see at the end you have Delmar's contact information. So thank you so much for joining. Please consider joining IEC today by using a link that should be in the chat box, or consider donating so we can continue doing great work like this. And we hope to see you on other webinars. So goodbye, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you, Delmar.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.